Madam President, I ask that unanimous consent that further proceedings under the quorum call be dispensed with.
Without objection.
I thank the Chair. Madam President, I rise today to offer my full support for Susan Carney of my state of Connecticut, who is the President's nominee, now approved by the Judiciary Committee, to serve on a very important circuit court, the United States Court of Appeals for the Second Circuit. Susan Carney's legal education and long career of public service, I think, will make her a valuable addition to the federal bench. I thank President Obama for his decision to nominate Ms. Carney, and I urge my colleagues across party lines to confirm her nomination when it comes to a vote in a short while today. Ms. Carney, as a matter of record, was quickly reported out of the Judiciary Committee with a bipartisan vote of 15-3 on February 17th of this year. This, in fact, was the second time that her nomination had been reported out of the committee with broad bipartisan support. If confirmed, Susan Carney will fill one of two judicial vacancies on the Second Circuit, vacancies which the Administrative Office of the U.S. Courts has declared to be emergency vacancies. And as I've said, she's been thoroughly vetted twice by the committee, the Judiciary Committee, and earned bipartisan support both times. I'd like to just take a moment to provide some background on the nominee's credentials. Susan Carney has a very diverse legal background, both in private practice and working for the Peace Corps, and most recently serving as the Deputy General Counsel at Yale University. For the past 12 years, she's served in that position, and as Yale's President Richard Levin put it, Susan Carney has served the university with, quote, insight, intelligence, and superb legal skills. And he added that she has never failed to be guided by what he referred to as, quote, her firm ethical compass, end of quote. In her capacity as General Counsel, Ms. Carney was the second highest legal officer at Yale, which is, of course, not just a great educational and research institution, but has an operating budget of more than $2 billion annually, more than 12,000 employees, and more than 11,000 students. So there was a lot of legal work to do there. Ms. Carney's portfolio included a variety of complex areas covered by federal law, including scientific research, intellectual property, and health care. And she also managed other legal elements of Yale's transactions with institutions throughout this country and the world. Ms. Carney served as a law clerk to Judge Levin Hicks Campbell on the U.S. Court of Appeals for the First Circuit before entering private practice. She's been admitted to practice in 7 courts, including the United States Supreme Court, the U.S. Court of Appeals for the First Circuit, and the U.S. Court of Appeals for the Ninth Circuit. She's a member of 3 different bars, the Massachusetts Bar, the District of Columbia Bar, and the Connecticut Bar, and has also served on the board of directors of the National Association of College and University Attorneys. This is a superbly qualified individual with a broad background in a host of different legal fields, which she will bring to the bench. I think most significant of all, and she obviously impressed members of both parties on the Judiciary Committee, she's balanced. She's open-minded. She will adjudicate according to what President Levin called her firm ethical and moral compass. And therefore, I hope that there will be a strong vote of support to send Susan Carney to the Second Circuit Court of Appeals, where she will serve the cause of justice in America very, very well indeed. I thank the chair. I yield the floor, and I'll wait just a minute. Before yielding the floor, Madam President, I have 9 unanimous requests for committees to meet during today's session of the Senate. They have the approval of the majority and minority leaders. I ask unanimous consent that these requests be agreed to and that these requests be printed in the record.
Without objection.
I thank the chair, and now I would suggest the absence of a quorum.
The clerk will call the roll.
Mr. Akaka.
Mr. President, I ask that the calling of the quorum be suspended.
Without objection.
I come to the floor to address for my colleagues and the public at large the issue of the nomination of Susan Carney, nominated for the Second Circuit, and we'll soon be voting on that. Today's vote marks the 24th judicial confirmation this year and the 16th for a seat designated as a judicial emergency. This also marks the fourth vacancy to the Second Circuit that has been filled by an Obama nominee. Over the past 2 weeks, nominations-related work has taken up the vast majority of the Senate's time. In fact, after today, we will have confirmed 7 judges in just 9 days. Last week alone, we had a cloture vote on the nominee to be Deputy Attorney General, debate and votes on 3 district court nominees, and 2 Judiciary Committee markups. This year, the committee has reported 51% of the President Obama's nominees. Yet it seems that the more we work with the majority on filling vacancies, the more complaints that we hear. Furthermore, as we work together to confirm consensus nominees, we're met with the majority's insistence that we turn to controversial nominees. So I want to address some of the complaints that we have heard. I think about the American Conservative Society blog or some of my colleagues in the Senate here who say that we're not moving fast enough on President Obama's nominees. And I want to point out to them that that's intellectually dishonest. They may be ignorant about some of the statistics that involve the nominees we've approved so far versus what has been done in other administrations, but I want to show that it's an outright flat lie that we're not processing nominees fast enough. Given the pace of activity in our committee and on the floor, there is just no credibility to the arguments that we're not moving fast enough. Last week, it was stated that the Senate is well behind on President Obama's nominations. So I would provide perspective on that assertion. For comparable time periods, we have processed and confirmed a greater percentage of President Obama's nominees. When we get done with the vote that we're going to take in about 30 minutes, we will have confirmed 33% of President Obama's nominees nominated this year. That compares to only 28% of President Bush's nominees confirmed in a comparable time period. Furthermore, President Obama's nominees are moving much faster through the committee process. President Obama's circuit court nominees have waited only, on average, 72 days from nomination to hearing. President Bush's had to wait, on average, 275 days during his first term. For his entire presidency, that averaged almost 247 days. President Obama's district court nominees are also faring better, waiting on average only 70 days for their hearing. President Bush's district court nominees had an average wait of closer to 100 days, and that was during his first term, and an average of 120 days throughout his entire presidency. These statistics and our continued action moving on consensus nominees refutes the argument made by those who continue to falsely claim that there is a systematic delay and partisan obstruction of judicial nominees by Republicans in the Senate. And so I want those people and those organizations and their blogs that are making these dishonest comments about how slow we move to put those statistics that I just gave in their pipe and smoke it. My concern or today, we're going to vote on the nomination of Susan Carney, and this will be for the U.S. Circuit Judge for the Second Circuit. Ms. Carney received her A.B. cum laude from Harvard University in '73 and her Juris Doctorate magna cum laude from Harvard Law School in '77. Upon graduation from law school, she clerked for Judge Campbell on the First Circuit and then entered private practice. After 8 years of private practice, Ms. Carney was self-employed for the next 6 years, engaged in contract legal work and doing consulting. In 1994, the nominee returned to legal practice as counsel to Bredhoff and Kaiser here in Washington, D.C. In 1996, she moved to the Peace Corps, where she served as Associate General Counsel for 2 years. In 1998, she joined the General Counsel's office at Yale University, where she has been the Deputy General Counsel for the past 9 years. My concern with Ms. Carney's nomination is her lack of experience. She has judicial experience and has limited litigation experience. Ms. Carney has never authored any scholarly legal work of note, and much of her work product provided to the committee consists of presentations about various legal issues faced by research universities. Her qualification for the Court of Appeals, and indeed the reason for the President's decision to nominate her to the Second Circuit, remains somewhat of a mystery. According to her questionnaire, Ms. Carney appeared in court occasionally over the course of her career, and those words occasionally are her own. She has never tried any case to verdict, judgment, or final decision. And absent, she explains by saying that she, quote, spent her law career as an appellate lawyer and in-house counsel, end of quote. Her questionnaire suggests that she has never argued a case in an appellate court. During her most recent legal job, Ms. Carney has focused largely on contractual issues such as scientific research partnerships between academic researchers and for-profit industry, international partnerships involving Yale, and intellectual property ownership issues. Her questionnaire reveals no litigation experience in the last 15 years of her career, and it is unclear how her position with Yale University might have prepared her for the federal judicial appointment, much less one on the Courts of Appeal. The ABA, meaning the American Bar Association Standing Committee on the Federal Judiciary, gave her the rating, quote, substantial majority qualified, minority not qualified, end of quote. Even though the reasons behind the ratings are not released, I suspect the not qualified rating stems from her lack of litigation experience. This nominee does not have the concrete judicial experience I favor. I know others share this view. The Judiciary Committee reported this nominee by a vote of 15-3, with 3 Republican in opposition, not including this senator. I take their views seriously and fully understand why senators would not support this nomination. Nevertheless, with little enthusiasm for her nomination, I will give her the benefit of the doubt and support the nominee. I yield the floor and suggest the absence of a quorum.
Clerk will call the roll.
Mr. Akaka.
Senator from Vermont.
Mr. President, I ask consent to call the quorum be dispensed with.
Without objection.
Mr. President, today the Senate is finally considering the nomination of Susan Carney of Connecticut to fill a seat on the Court of Appeals for the Second Circuit, a seat that is actually a judicial emergency vacancy. Now, I raise this because I've expressed concern on the floor about these judicial emergency vacancies that are going unfilled, not because the President hasn't sent the nomination up here, but because it's delayed so. In her case, she was twice considered by the Judiciary Committee, twice reported a strong bipartisan support, first last year and again months ago in February. The majority of the Republicans on the Judiciary Committee have twice voted in supporting this nomination. I expect she's going to be confirmed with significant bipartisan support, but it should have been done last year. It's one of several judicial nominations that minority Republicans refused to consider, even though she was reported favorably by the Judiciary Committee last year. Hers will be the 16th, only the 16th nomination confirmed this year that could, in my view, should have been considered last year. With 24 judicial nominations the Senate will have considered and confirmed this year, including Ms. Carney, but almost 70% were delayed from last year and should have been considered and confirmed last year. We've only been able to confirm 8 judicial nominees that had hearings and reported for the first time this year. So when some say we're taking positive action on large percentages of nominees, what they're saying is that we're taking action on many unobjectionable nominees that were stalled last year by objections from the Republicans. In fact, this is only the 3rd Circuit Court nomination that the Senate's been allowed to consider all year, and there have been several others awaiting final Senate action. Now, Susan Carney is currently the Deputy General Counsel of Yale University. She has a career of distinguished service. It's one I've looked at carefully because, of course, Vermont's in the Second Circuit, as well as New York and Connecticut. In her case, I think how fortunate the circuit is to have her. She graduated with honors from Harvard College and Harvard Law School. She clerked for Judge Levin Campbell of the Court of Appeals for the First Circuit. She spent 17 years in private practice, obtaining significant appellate litigation experience before becoming the Associate General Counsel of the Peace Corps. She has spent the last 13 years in the Office of the General Counsel at Yale University. She's now Yale's 2nd highest ranking legal officer. Her nomination has the strong support of both her home state senators. Before he retired from the Senate, Senator Dodd introduced Ms. Carney to the Judiciary Committee at her nomination hearing. He said this: "Throughout her career, Susan Carney has developed a professional versatility and breadth of legal knowledge, well suited to serve in the Second Circuit Court of Appeals. Perhaps even more important, I believe she has exhibited the kind of temperament and unflinching respect for the rule of law that are absolutely critical components of serving in the federal courts." So Senator Dodd said, and I agree with him. Went on to say concerns that Ms. Carney lacks sufficient experience to be an appellate court judge are misplaced. She's been a lawyer for 30 years. She has a wealth of experience, including 17 years in private practice with experience in appellate litigation. That's what I say about the concerns raised. But I have nonetheless heard this purported concern raised by the handful of Republican senators who oppose this extremely well-qualified woman. And I believe that Ms. Carney's wide range of experience, a lawyer in private practice, deputy general counsel of one of the world's leading education research institutions, one with an annual budget that exceeds $2 billion, prepared and well to serve on the Second Circuit. As I said, in New York, in Connecticut, and in Vermont, the three states represented on the Second Circuit, senators from each of those three states support her. You know, I did not hear the same Republican senators who say that this distinguished woman does not have enough judicial experience. They did not note any concerns about lack of judicial experience when President Bush nominated, and this Senate confirmed, 24 nominees to circuit courts with no prior judicial experience, and a number with very little trial litigation experience. Even as some Republicans have opposed this nominee by saying that she does not have sufficient litigation experience, Republican senators have recently tried to twist nominees' litigation experience against them. Partisan attacks are not consistent. When a nominee has extensive experience and is a successful trial lawyer, then they say the nominee has too much experience. They're going to be biased by it. Republicans opposed Judge McConnell of Rhode Island because he was an excellent trial lawyer. They opposed Judge Chen of California despite his 10 years as a fair and impartial federal judge magistrate, and they disregarded his judicial record. So their opposition to President Obama's judicial nominees have been anything but consistent. And now they turn around and some will oppose Ms. Carney, a nominee. She has more than 30 years of legal experience, by saying she has not had sufficient experience as a trial advocate. This reminds me of the story of the mother who sent her son 2 neckties as gifts. When she visited, the son picked her up at the airport, dutifully wearing one of the ties his mother sent, only to hear his mother say, "What's the matter? Don't you like the other tie?" Well, you know, the standard seems to change depending upon who President Obama sends up here. So let's turn away from such double standards and return to the long-standing Senate practice of judging nominees on their merits, not based on caricatures. And our ability to finally, after a year, to reach a time agreement and have a vote on the nomination of Susan Carney, this extraordinarily qualified woman, is a welcome sign of progress. Now, we still have a long way to go to do as well as we did during President Bush's first term, with Democrats in charge for the first half of that, when we confirmed 205 of his judicial nominations. What I hope is that the other side start cooperating the way we did with President Bush, and allow us to ensure that the federal judiciary has the judges it needs to provide justice to Americans throughout this country, especially in those areas with judicial emergencies. President, I yield the floor. I'd suggest the absent quorum and ask the time be charged to both sides.
Clerk will call the roll.
Mr. Akaka.
Senator from Idaho.
Mr. President, I ask that the quorum call be listed.
Without objection.
Mr. President,